Think about it. Anyways, you live and you learn. The education system is a human made set of institutions that have been naturalized over time. They've come to seem natural to us as just the default rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. And it just becomes second nature that in order to be any meaningful part of society, you need to spend most of your youth in an educational context. School is with us and around us for most of our formative years, and we never question the fact that every society throughout history has had some sort of culturally authorized progression process from childhood to adulthood, but our specific education system as it currently stands wasn't always like this. It wasn't a natural part of life that humans need to undertake these specific authorized steps in order to progress from being a child to an adult. But over time, it's made to seem to us as a natural thing, the only way. Much as we were discussing with prisons and how the prison system replaced the guillotine as the default mode of punishment, it's the same case for education and the discourse surrounding it. Education didn't always take the form that currently feels so natural to us. Other cultures and societies in past, present, and future have different rituals because education is a ritual. Other cultures across history have had different ways and discourses for instituting that rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. But within our discourse, the education system is constructed to be the authority on any matters related to our society's version of this rite of passage. It's made to seem to us as the only legitimate way of progressing in society, as the natural, unquestionable, unchanging way of doing things, even though it's a discourse like any others. And it's a socially constructed discourse, just like every other discourse we've talked about so far, just like medical and scientific discourse. Last week, academic discourse constructs its subjects and its texts as the authorities who claim legitimacy over defining what is and isn't considered knowledge, or what is and isn't considered an educational experience, or who is and isn't authorized to teach or to learn. We tend to just take it as a natural fact of life that in order for you to progress in life, you must progressively finish elementary school, then high school, then attain a bachelor's degree or post-secondary diploma at least. And those are just naturalized and made to seem like necessary steps in every one of our lives so that we don't even consider possible our alternatives to our current rites of passage, our current education system and ways of learning. Because any sort of alternatives could move us away and take power away from those recognized and entrenched institutions in our society. So primary schools, preschools, elementary schools, high schools, colleges, universities, training centers, all these things that are a part of that academic discourse that claims to be the only way of learning and growing and being in life. Those are the authorized and naturalized places where what we consider to be education is deemed allowable to happen and to take place. And even when schooling is moved online, as we've seen since the pandemic, our reigning educational system and institutions and academic discourse still claim to be the only sources of authority in the online world of learning, just as much as the physical world of learning. So those same elementary schools, high schools, colleges, and universities are operating and enveloping students in their discourse and power relations as they persist into the online space. So it's not like the pandemic liquidated the power and authority vested in these institutions. Like if you're a parent of a child who goes to elementary school and you're busy with work, just because the pandemic happens, doesn't mean you're going to start homeschooling your child or taking them out of the education system entirely and trying some alternative teaching method. You're just going to continue with that elementary school in whatever online format they transition to during the pandemic, so that elementary school or any level of schooling still claims legitimacy in that online space that it hadn't previously been in up to 2 years ago. Like, what does an elementary school that's been operating in person for decades know about online learning? But that doesn't stop parents from trusting these authorities and keeping their kids enrolled in whatever online version that elementary school is trying to fit its education into. And of course, the same thing with universities. They've transitioned very easily to online learning, and they still claim all of the authority and legitimacy in the realm of learning, even when it takes place online, so that their scope of authority is extended beyond their physical walls. You don't have to be sitting in a classroom or be inside the physical institution of a school at all to still be under its power and its discourse. Because now we have Canvas and elementarschool.org or whatever online forms that continue to legitimize these institutions and their claim over our educational experiences, regardless of the media through which they occur. So when I say school, I mean the entire schooling and education system, all of its interrelated institutions, all the different forms that institutionalized education can take. And it's where many of the forms of everyday power that we've outlined so far, such as discipline and habitus, all kind of converge onto the student and the subject position of the student, kind of molding them into an obedient and predictable member of society. That ideal member of society who doesn't cause trouble for the people in charge, they're good worker bees. It's that subject position, that subjectivity that's being produced through the education system that we all adopt, through all of its techniques, through the structures of schools, and through all the modes of monitoring and testing and examination and judgment and categorization that these schools employ. All those terms should be familiar to you because I covered them all in the week on disciplinary power as it relates to prisons. I'm not saying school is a prison, but it definitely exhibits a lot of the same structural and discursive characteristics and effects on how students conduct themselves. Just as prisons' physical architecture are structured in a way that's conducive towards drilling and developing certain habits and behaviors into prisoners, schools are structured in similarly disciplinary ways to structure students' conduct and behavior into the model student. So think about the floor layouts of classrooms. Think about the hallways of these institutions and how they channel mass populations of students from class to class in an orderly fashion, and how students, as a result of these structures that channel their movements, they just tend to naturally organize themselves, like stick to one side of the hall while walking or assembling outside of a classroom to wait before it's opened. The structure prompts people to fall in line as if it's natural and spontaneous, but it's all structured to feel that way. And you can look at the seating arrangements in classrooms, the chairs and desks that are arranged and organized in such a way so that when you sit down, you're facing forward. You're facing the teacher, you're facing the source of information, and it discourages you from turning left or right or talking with your friends. And that continues on to university. You can see in the background of this slide a lecture hall where the focal point is the front of the classroom and everyone's attention is guided towards that by virtue of the structure of the seating arrangements. And think about school uniforms. I know they're not present in university, but a lot of high schools require students to wear a uniform or at least follow a dress code. And it's in the word itself, uniform, all taking the same form. So everyone's made to dress the same in order to encourage conformity and fitting in with following the group. And this instilled conformity will be a recurring theme throughout your education, so that when you do exit your education at some point and enter the working world, you already have those self-disciplined habits of obedience and docility and falling in with the group drilled into you so that you naturally conduct yourself accordingly. Even consider the schoolyards back in elementary school and high school and how recess and gym class were like the favorite parts of every student's school schedule. But again, just as prisoners have uniforms, they also have yard time, exercise time in their prison yards that would serve a very similar purpose that it does in the education context for expending the physical energy of students so that students can run around during recess and expend all their physical energy. And when they come back to class, they won't be as restless or fidgety and thus be more inclined to focus and be well behaved and docile. And continuing with the disciplinary theme, think of the panoptic role that the teacher or the administration play, and how, of course, there are a lot of security cameras everywhere in a school, but then also no matter where you go, there's a teacher somewhere, a teacher at the front of the classroom, or even when you're in the schoolyard, there are teachers patrolling the grounds. There's the sense that you're always being monitored by an authority figure. So again, naturally, you start monitoring yourself and start behaving as if you were being watched, even when you aren't, thus initiating that self-discipline from an early age. All of these aspects of our schooling are disciplinary techniques that instill with us certain habits and behaviors that will make it less likely once we enter into the harsh reality of the working world to resist its workings or to question them. Education acclimates us to being patient and obedient in the midst of the seemingly uncontrollable forces surrounding us. And we bring that same disposition into the working world so that we're less likely to see anything wrong with it or challenge it. So pretty much all the disciplinary techniques and power dynamics that we identified in the prison system are very much at play and in operation within the education system. The cultivation of certain habits, the drilling of specific behaviors into students through repetition, such as rote learning, repeated reading exercises or writing exercises or math exercises to drill certain knowledges and behaviors into us, the monitoring and examination of students who, upon being examined, are then divided into different classes. So the advanced level class or the basic level class or the special classes, that hierarchization of individuals, the setting of a norm, and then anyone who deviates from that norm is judged and categorized accordingly as deviating. All of these disciplinary elements are present in the schooling system from as early as preschool and elementary school, making them, and all schools to some degree, disciplinary apparatuses. Educational institutions also have systems of rewards and punishments. In preschool, bad behavior may have resulted in a timeout or missing recess. In elementary school, you could also have your playing time taken away, but if you behave well and perform up to the standards set by the institution, you could get a shiny star sticker. If you do really well, you might get one of those scratch and sniff stickers that always smell like plastic and glue. And in high school and university, that same reward punishment system is overlaid on top of the grading system and how students must perform to attain certain grades and improve or avoid lowering their GPA. All of these mechanisms are put in place in the structure of the education system to ingrain certain rewarded patterns of behavior and deter other deviant forms of behavior. So all of this is to say that schooling, especially those early years of primary schooling, can be seen as an ensemble of rituals and practices that are responsible for that initial and ongoing formation of specific cultural attributes within an individual, potentially displacing values and habits that may have been instilled within them in other areas of life, such as family life. If everyone homeschooled their children directly without entering them into this massified education system, you'd have a lot of non-conformity. You'd have a lot of dissenting voices amongst the population, as people would all see things very differently, which isn't good for ideology and the powers that be. They want the knowledge and the thinking patterns of the masses to be more uniform. They want it to be synchronized in favor of the elites. So the education seeks to reduce our potential diversity of perspectives by taking that influential power away from the private household, because that's where potential deviations in behavior can be fostered, and instead force children into this universalized institutional system of learning so that everyone is indoctrinated with the same ways of thinking about and saying things and doing things. It seeks to remove those potentially countercultural and contrarian viewpoints that may have emerged within family life or other areas of life outside of school, and replace them with a more mass-produced way of seeing things and doing things. So the education system is a pedagogical apparatus directed at forming the attributes of a population. And the resultant attributes of our current system typically include regularity, predictability, dependability, punctuality, desire for self-improvement, and all these aspects and values and virtues that can be seen in your typical worker and working class citizen post-education. And that's because while they were consciously learning and absorbing information during their education, they were also unconsciously learning and inculcating and developing a certain academic habitus, and then later by extension a working habitus, to the point where it just feels natural and seamless to act and possess meaning as this predictable and obedient subject of academic and work discourse. If all those people were homeschooled and grew up directly learning from their own potentially jaded working class parents who are disillusioned by the current system that they've been subjected to for years, they may instill in their children viewpoints that are alternative and potentially radically alternative to the norm espoused by established places of learning. And those people could grow up to be a lot more challenging and destabilizing to the structure of society. But the education system seeks to wipe away any of those potentially destabilizing and deviating elements from our developmental paths to adulthood and replace them with a habitus that's more in line with and conforming to the way things are and not challenging them.